It is the time to acquire players for 2024 and beyond. Welcome into the Voice of College Football and our OU show that we present here on our Sooners channel each and every Wednesday. We got Jason Ray, of course, here for another edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. How are you, sir?
Doing well. And, when I say acquire players for 2024, I'm still in that old mindset. Acquire players for 2023 too.
Right.
So get these guys on campus that already have experience at the FBS level. And the two most recent would be Troy Everett, the offensive lineman from Appalachian State, and also Connor Neal, linebacker from Ferris State. That's a typical destination to go from Ferris State to Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And as we talked about before we went live, there's some precedents for this, right? For some of these big schools to kind of scour the and I think Ferris State is D2 at the D2 level, but I think they were back-to-back national championship results. So certainly a good program at that level. But yeah, I think it's an interesting move. A guy that probably is there for depth. I don't know that, and we'll see how that goes in the fall here. But a guy to provide some depth to that linebacking core as well. And as you'd mentioned, Troy Everett as well, the offensive lineman for Appalachian State. He was at Oklahoma for the spring game, and it was one of those things that had went back and forth. I believe it was between Oklahoma and Virginia Tech for his services. He was really leaning towards Virginia Tech. Oklahoma and Beatonbow made a last push for him, and certainly Oklahoma got his commitment. So again, a couple of areas, Mark, that there's some depth concerns, I guess I should say, where they feel like that they need to bolster that roster a little bit. So, and I think they've also offered a couple of DBs as well. So with Jaden Davis leaving, I think there's the thought that this team felt pretty strong with where they are from a depth perspective in the secondary. But, I think from some of the things that I'm hearing is Venables and the staff, just generally speaking, doesn't want to go into a situation where they feel inexperienced or ill prepared in a certain positional group, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, right? And so, there's not like any other big time school. There's some pressure already, and I think Brent is feeling it. Not necessarily like there's any kind of impending doom, right? But I think there's the conventional thought that from people that don't necessarily know football in and out, there's some conventional thought that, okay, Lincoln Riley held this together, even though like they don't know and they don't care that it was held together by just fantastic quarterback play and great offense, right? Like a lot of the people that certainly make these decisions are just consistent with the fact that this team was a 10-win team over and over again, made the playoffs and things like that. Now, and so I think there was a lot of surprise and there was a lot of, quite frankly, concern with a 6 and 7 season. So I say all that to say, I think Brent realizes this. He knows this. He knows that Oklahoma is no different than, Ohio State, Alabama, one of those schools in terms of you can't throw out a 6 and 7 season too consistently and expect to remain either employed or in super and obviously in high standing within the university. So I think, saying that, Mark, I say that to say I don't think that they're going to take any chances on allowing a positional group or allowing any point of the roster to be at a position where it's inexperienced. So we mentioned those two guys that certainly have experience. I think on the DB side, they're looking for someone, not necessarily a a younger kid, right? But I think they're looking for a kid that has, maybe just a couple more years left, or maybe just 1 year left, to look through that, because Oklahoma's they're going to have some interesting choices to make right now before the season starts, Mark, because I think they're somewhere around the 88, 89 scholarship. And we know that the scholarship limits at 85. So what they continue to do with that roster will be interesting up until fall. But yeah, I think right now the thought process and the position that this leadership of this team is holding is the fact that they need to do everything that they possibly can to turn this around to some degree this year.
I get a sense out there that many of these players in the transfer portal are somewhat overrated just because they're given too much attention. So it's this college version of free agency. And so as soon as you see somebody in the transfer portal, that they suddenly have this great value, when in fact, there's really a top end to it, and it dissipates rather quickly if you really look at the quality of players. Yes, you can go get some really good players, and certainly at the quarterback position, we've seen all sorts of really good players. Sam Hartman being a great example of being a game changer for a particular school at that position. And there have been some other ones, Kenneth Walker a couple years ago, going from Wake to Michigan State. So I'm not saying that they're not there, but and I get caught up in this as well, because this is what I do. And this is when one of these schools loses somebody to the transfer portal, or, on the back end, then somebody else gains them, that there's a lot of attention given to that, because we're trying to keep on top of the sport, and people are interested, and people are fans, and this is what makes it great during the off season, is people are interested in late breaking news. But I think we make way too much of some of these additions. When you really look at these players, the majority of the transfer portal, either these players, well, the majority, I will say it just flat out, that the majority of the transfer portal are players that couldn't find playing time at their current school. That doesn't mean that they can't find a better fit somewhere else, or improve as a player, or reach their potential and become something and be a good addition. But like Bear Alexander, he enters the transfer portal and he's treated like he's Will Anderson. Like he just had a 16 sack season, and he's a top recruit. He was a really good recruit, top 75 player. Um, is a really good addition for USC. And I'm not saying he won't turn out to be a really good addition and a strong player and a top defensive interior lineman, but he's an unproven commodity. And there seems to be a lot of attention given to more flash and hype than what is actual substance in the transfer portal. And at this stage of the game, there's not really much left in terms of proven commodities. There's this Texas San Antonio receiver, I forget his name. He caught like 90 passes the last couple seasons. He not only put up those kind of numbers, he's based on scouting reports supposed to be really that good. But there's few guys out there. Again, I don't know why I went on this rant, but I just think that there's way too much attention given. Like programs can save their season by going to the transfer portal.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. I think, in some degree, as you mentioned, I think the word that I fit is the big word, right? Because I would say it's probably harder when you're as a head coach recruiting out of the transfer portal than it is, recruiting from the high school and the JUCO ranks, right? Because you've got to you've really got to value where these kids' heads are at, in terms of, especially those that are committing that have only been at a school for a year, right? What's their work ethic like? Are they willing to work? Are they willing to work hard, wait their turn to go and get to wait to play, or is it one of those situations where it's just instant gratification? So I kind of my personal, I mean, and I know Colorado's a little bit of the exception and not the rule, right? Because of what they're doing, where they're just stop, they're literally creating a team from the transfer portal for the most part. So I think you have to be choosy in a lot of ways in terms of understanding what the mindset of some of these kids are. I think a guy. Um, a guy like Rondell Bothroyd that came to Oklahoma, you know, he could probably went into the NFL draft this year as an early entrance if he wanted to. I don't know how highly he would have been selected, but he elected to go to Oklahoma just to have one more year of polishing and coaching. So, like those are the ones that you tend to think that will be really, that will be really solid in your program versus the guys that first or second year that aren't there. But I think it's all about a fit to your to what your program is um, and how you bolster that roster. It's really an interesting dynamic that's part of the recruiting process. But I agree with you, Mark. I think I think for programs that are solidified, it's just a compliment to your recruiting process. Now, like I said, there's other situations where I know USC over the last couple of years has stockpiled some talent on both sides of the ball, and it's a way for teams to kind of get rich quick, so to speak. But I think there's it's a double-edged sword, as you mentioned.
Welcome to Oklahoma Sooners Live right here at the Voice of College Football, Wednesdays, 12:30 Eastern Time, 11:30 where it counts. And please lock in on the notifications that we provide to know when we're going live. For scheduling purposes, we sometimes have to move this show around. So before we get to the win total, another acquisition, of course, coming in over the last couple of days would be the junior college defensive end Lane Jenkins, who played 1 year at that level. Therefore, he was not rated or ranked in any such way. Do you know anything there in regards to what we can expect?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of info on him, but I think he's another guy again that will be able to that has a little bit more experience, right? Is not necessarily obviously a true freshman coming in from the high school ranks, but a guy that, as to your point, has a year in the JUCO system. So you would expect even at just a year for those kids maybe to be a little bit more polished, a little bit more ready to play from a body type perspective initially. But again, as I mentioned, I think these are additions to make sure, because these all of these additions that you've seen over the last few weeks are guys obviously from a transfer portal, or in this situation bringing in a JUCO guy that is they're guys that have some sort of experience. So bringing that to the level of whatever it is, and you can see the trend, Mark, where this is continuously happening on the defensive side of the ball, right? We've got the defensive lineman. I mean, Troy Everett obviously coming over as offensive lineman, but a lot of these these discussions are around the DB position, the defensive lineman position, the linebacker spot. So I think obviously there was a glaring weakness on the defensive side of the ball, right? I mean, I think a lot of people pinpoint the offense, pinpoint Dillon Gabriel, and and that he's not necessarily at the same level of these other guys, but defensively, this is where this team needs to make the biggest jump. And so, getting that competitive, I think that roster that's kind of competitive, in some of the things that we'd mentioned last year, in a lot of areas, Oklahoma didn't have the quality depth, and so guys weren't really pushed. They weren't really pushed as hard as they um, they probably could or should have been in a normal regular season. So I think adding these kids to these really will just do nothing but make that competition a little bit stronger here in the fall.
And by the way, at 6'3", 280, Everett, not a stopgap from the transfer portal. He still has 3 years of eligibility remaining, so there's something that they can work with and develop there and make him an even better player. And apparently he was a good player at App State, so they may have something there with Everett in particular. Before we get to the win totals, comment made by Fail BV. Wonder if he's sending a message there. But what do you think about this? So Brent Venables, arguably the best defensive coordinator in college football, becomes a head coach, and we've talked about this, both leading into his first season and then in the aftermath of not having the greatest defensive showing in his first season. Then you've got Ted Roof there, and just in terms of what the viewers pointing out here, having a true defensive coordinator that is really at the top of his game, one of the best in the business, and cutting him loose and letting him do his thing, versus having Venables really have his hands in the defense.
Yeah, so I think, Mark, there's a lot of meat to this, right? So when Venables came in, he had a model that Bob Stoops laid out that he wanted to execute, and that really was that Bob was very hands-on in the defense the first few years. Obviously, he had his brother and he had Brent there that he certainly that he trusted as well, but his initial goal was like Bob still ran the defense to a certain degree during practices and even during games and things like that. And then obviously a few years later, he kind of, really just kind of stepped away. A couple of years later, I should say, really stepped away and let Mike and let Brent really run that defense. And it was a very successful model. And so that was the model really that Brent envisioned when he came over here for the first couple of years, was to put someone that he knew and that he trusted and that he worked with, um, in terms of that defensive coordinator, and let Brent really just kind of run that and himself, and let him be there at that defensive coordinator position, there as well. And so I think what's happened, Mark, is I think Brent underestimated to a certain degree the amount of obligation that he has as a head coach. Not only, I mean, from a practice time perspective, but just during the week and game day prep and all of these things put together. And I think I don't know that I would necessarily go as far as to say he's not a real defensive coordinator. Like, he's done a good job at certainly at other places that he's been, right? But I think it's somewhere in between the two. So obviously, you have assumptions going into a lot of different things, right? When you go to a new job or you go to a new role or you do something, even if it's outside of the coaching profession, right? That you have an assumption of how things are going to go, and they don't necessarily really go that way. And then you have to kind of adjust on the fly, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see how that continues to, continues to go through with him, and then obviously Ted Roof as the defensive coordinator in name. But we all know that Brent was calling the defense and doing that. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what that dynamic looks like, going through this year. I know that Brent has been very keyed on knowing that, I know there's a lot of things that I need to do better in terms of time management, in terms of practice management, game management, like some of those things. But I think at the end of the day, they have the talent from a defensive staff perspective. So I think they can kind of lean on Todd Bates. They can lean on Miguel Chavis from a defensive line perspective. They can lean on a lot of these other coaches that they have to shoulder maybe a little bit more of the load from that perspective, just to allow that game management, practice management to be at the level that it needs to be. And certainly, as a first time head coach, like we've talked about this a little bit before, Mark, but as a first time head coach at any point in his career, you have to expect, I think, to a certain degree, some of these things, right, in your first year. But the the rubber's going to meet the road this year, from one way or the other. But I think he set himself up to be in a much better position than what he was last year, for sure.
As our viewer Jimmy here is pointing out, Bryant Wesco, of course, the top-rated player in the state of Texas, a top wide receiver in the country, top 10 player overall out of Middleton, Texas. The crystal balls are pointing almost exclusively in OU's favor, but apparently he's not visiting this summer. And Jimmy was curious as to whether there should be any concern about losing Bryant Wesco. And when I say losing, I shouldn't even state it that way, because he's not committed anywhere. He's just seems to be in Oklahoma's camp.
Yeah, there's nothing that I've heard that's really of any real concern, Jimmy. I've not heard anybody say that they feel any less confident about him coming, about Bryant coming to Oklahoma and securing that pledge. And who knows, at this point, maybe he could decide to come to the barbecue, or he could decide at some point, where, because kids, that these plans change very, very often. But there's nothing that, I'll keep my ear to the ground and see, and kind of probe to see. But there's nothing that I've heard from anyone that leads me to believe that there's a whole lot of concern with that right now.
Our buddy Felipe is chiming in with an undefeated season with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. Dylan is going to be a Heisman candidate, but Caleb Williams will win the Heisman, and USC is going undefeated as well. So that's Felipe's take on the season, which leads us right into the win totals that were released by DraftKings last week. And Oklahoma's at 9.5, coming off a win total of 6. I don't think that's ridiculous. I do think that's quite the leap, that they're going to win 9 or 10 games, is what they're telling us. We'll pull up the schedule here and give it a look. But what was your initial reaction to 9.5?
Yeah, very similar to you, Mark. Not completely ridiculous. I think just realistically, maybe a little bit optimistic from kind of from my viewpoint right now. Now we'll see, right? Let's see how this roster shapes out. If Oklahoma gets any more portal commitments or anything like that, and let's see how things move forward. I know that we've talked about the schedule a little bit, and it being a little bit easier than than what it was a year ago, right? But you've got a couple of tricky road games. Obviously, Tulsa shouldn't. The first 3 games non-conference, I don't really see Oklahoma having a whole lot of trouble there, right? But I think it's one of those things, if you just assume, and I'm not making this assumption, but just for argument's sake, you assume, let's just assume Texas is the loss. And like I said, I'm not saying that that's the case, or I don't necessarily feel that way. But if Texas is lost, you can only lose to get to the over on the 9.5 in the regular season. Here you only have one more loss. So they've got some tricky road games at at Cincinnati right before you start conference season, with Iowa State coming in later in the season. They've got a trip to BYU that will be very interesting. in terms of what that schedule looks like. Then you've got, I mean, Oklahoma goes to Kansas. They've had trouble with Kansas the last couple of years as well. I think all areas point to Oklahoma State maybe being a little bit down this year, but it's always, in-state rival. Probably the last time that they're going to play for a while, right? So Oklahoma State will obviously desperately want this game on their own home field, and as we mentioned, BYU. So I don't know, Mark. I kind of go back and forth. I don't if I was betting, if I was laying my money on this, I think I would probably tend to go uh, under. Not to say that they can't get to 10 wins. I was just right now where this roster sits and just some of the limitations that they have, where they have them. As we've talked about, I'm kind of right now in the 8-4, 9-3 range. But it certainly could happen to get to 10 if some things go to go Oklahoma's way. But we'll see. I mean, like I said, the schedule's not quite as tough as it was last year, demanding as it was last year. No Kansas State on the schedule, no Texas Tech, which are two teams that are very much up and coming, particularly Kansas State making it to the Big 12 championship game last year. So I think that'll be very intriguing in terms of the less tough schedule that Oklahoma had a year ago.
Yeah, a few things point in the direction of a big surge for Oklahoma for me. One would be that they lost a bunch of one-score games. As we, I think, reviewed a couple of weeks ago, they lost 6 games in the regular season, and the Texas game was a disaster. But besides that, even the 2-score loss to Iowa State was, in a sense, a one-score loss. They lost all close games last season. I'd have to go back and think about what close games they won, because it's always, as a fan, easy to say, well, we lost all these close games, so we can turn some of those around. True, but also needing to look at how many close wins did you have. But they did lose close games, so they weren't far away. Number two is that if you look at coaches who have eventually become mega successful at a school, whether that's, and they took over a situation that needed some correction, whether that's Pete Carroll at USC, Nick Saban at Alabama, Dabo Swinney at Clemson. They took off the second season. They had a rough first season. They had to work through some things. The record wasn't great. Then they took off. Nick Saban was 7-6. Pete Carroll was 6-6. Dabo Swinney was 6-7. That's happened at other stops. And then they took off on that second season. They had the full off season to review what went wrong, what they need to do, and they took off. Now, I'm not putting Venables in that class, but he may be one day. The other thing is obviously the non-conference schedule. They've got 3 almost assured wins right out of the gate. There's no type of game that they've had in the past out of conference. Ohio State home and home comes to mind, where that's really a toss-up. They should be 3-0 out of the gate. In addition to that, they also play in a league where there's not a near automatic loss. There's not a trip to Alabama. There's not a trip to Ohio State or something like that, where you're not giving up on the game saying all is lost, but most likely that's a loss. There are none of those games. Now, Texas, if they reach their potential, could really be the best team in the league. But that, of course, has yet to be proven, and that's a topic we hit all the time. Texas still has to prove that they can turn talent into wins and championships. So they can win all these games. They are most likely better than just about everybody on the schedule outside of Texas. but the likelihood, but they're also facing a lot of capable opponents that
Right.
they should beat 70 or 80% of the time. But once you start to stack those games up, the likelihood is that you're going to trip up a couple times. And so that's kind of how I see it. And I would tend to go with the under.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, and there's a lot of unknowns, right? I mean, and yeah, I mean, you can probably say that about a majority of the teams coming into this 2023 season, but there's a lot of unknowns with this Oklahoma team, right? Can they, to your point, can they win, find a way to win some of these close games where they really just found a way to lose most of them this past year? As you mentioned, I think there was either 5 of 7 games that were either with 1 to 2 scores, maybe 4 of which were 1 scores, and the other one was the one that you mentioned to Iowa State outside of the non-competitive performances against Texas and TCU. I mean, I think there's the one thing that bodes well. I mean, typically you see the most improvement from year 1 to year 2 in a program. I mean, just think about what 1999 versus 2000 meant for this Oklahoma program. So there's some precedent that you can see that certainly Oklahoma has the ability to get to 10 or 11. Now undefeated, I mean they will have to have quite a few things go their way. Quite a few, I think, areas on the team that perform much better than expected, right? And then just have some lucky breaks, I think, as well, go your way. But yeah, the differences in these last 2 years that we've talked about, Mark, is Oklahoma 2 years ago found a way to win some of these close games, and last year they really kind of just found a way to lose them, right? So can they split the difference, right? Can they win 3 of the 4 games as opposed to losing all 4? Now, I think the conventional thought, just generically speaking, was that Caleb Williams saved Oklahoma in 2 or 3 of those games, and Dylan Gabriel doesn't necessarily have the ability to put a team on his back the same way that a Caleb Williams did, or whoever quarterback that you want to say from Oklahoma's past. So that's why I think this team is going to have to rely on a lot of improvement from the defensive side of the ball. Understand what Dylan Gabriel is. He's a really good quarterback, but he's not going to be the guy that's going to that's going to put a team on his back and shoulder the load and say, okay, I'm going to go win this game by myself. So this team has to be much better defensively, and if they can, if they improve dramatically on the defensive side of the ball, then absolutely 10 wins is possible. But I think they will be vastly improved, but I just don't know if they will be improved enough to hide some of the limitations that Oklahoma has at the quarterback position at this point.
Felipe says, why does nobody believe in Dylan Gabriel? The dude is a straight up baller by all means. I sure miss him playing at UCF. He was awesome quarterback and will be dominant this year at Oklahoma. So Felipe's high on Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, I mean, we've talked about this several times, and I know a lot of the people that probably listen to this probably feel like this is um, um, slamming Dylan Gabriel, and that's he had an outstanding season, right, for Oklahoma. The numbers represent that in what he was able to accomplish and what this team was not able to accomplish in year 1 under Jeff Lebby's offense. A completely new system, right? So when you say that the expectations are so much higher at Oklahoma than they are at UCF or a majority of the universities in the country outside of probably a handful of them, right? So I think quarterback play specifically is something that is obviously way more. Uh, there's way more expectations at that position. So I don't. I say that to say that he's not a bad quarterback. He's a really solid quarterback, very good. But my question is, can he be elite? Can he be not necessarily a Heisman contender, because I don't know that that's his ceiling. But can he be a top 10 quarterback in the country this year? Um, if he can, then I think that certainly helps Oklahoma get to where they want to get, and get on the positive side of this over under conversation. But I think without extensive help and support on the defensive side of the ball, that might look different.
There's not a ton of concrete recruiting news right now going on, but again, May and June are big on camps, and the big barbecues coming up here soon. Are there any particular prospects that you're watching to see if they make a move and commit?
Yeah, Mark, there's a couple. Well, I say there's a couple. There's probably about 8 or 9 that I've heard that's already committed to the barbecue here next month in June. There's a lot of these guys that we've talked about. Sammy Brown, from a linebacker perspective, one of the best number one rated linebacker in the country. They've got quite a few defensive linemen that are going to be in. We've talked about David Stone a lot. Nigel Smith is going to be there. Williams Nwaneri will be there as well. You've got Joseph Jonah will be there. So there's, of those groups, Mark, there's about 3 or 4 of those that are 5-star guys, and then you've got a couple of guys on the offensive side of the ball at the running back perspective. Caden Durham and Taylor Tatum both will be in Norman right now, and so that list will continue to grow and grow and grow. This is absolutely the biggest recruiting event that Oklahoma has all year. In some regards, it really surpasses what they do from a spring game perspective as well. So they go all in on this. So there's a couple of guys that, like I said, I think OU kind of lean. That is a lean for Oklahoma. Williams Nwaneri, I think, is a guy that's leaning Oklahoma. Nigel Smith is leaning Oklahoma. I think David Stone is Oklahoma's to lose at this point. Sammy Brown is the guy that's a little bit of a I think an anomaly in terms of where he goes. Like, this is a guy that Venables has really kind of latched onto in terms of a guy that he desperately wants to get into Norman. So Oklahoma's fighting with Georgia on him. So we'll see how that goes. He's expressed a lot of interest in Oklahoma. So I think this will see. This will be, I'm sorry, a really good, and I think a really good event. I think Oklahoma actually ended up getting 4 or 5 commitments out of this class, from this class, out of this event last year. So would really expect that to be, again, very, very positive and a big thing for Oklahoma.
All right, folks. We also want to remind you that we've got a Discord, which is basically just a chat that rolls 24/7, 365. You can talk Sooners there all the time. College football fans from all different fan bases are there. So you go to patreon.com, search Mark Rogers TV, and sign up, and you get entry into Discord and a lot of other benefits, including predictions from myself and a cast of Jason and others from our media panel once the season gets underway. We also have a number of watch parties, and we have a number of debates that are about to be unveiled with the ACC situation boiling, and that all coming out yesterday. That postponed one of our debates that we were going to have during our May Great Debate Month at the Voice of College Football. We had a lined up to watch the Clemson Ohio State 2019 playoff game with all the controversial calls and decisions. And so we are taking your requests for great debates. We've had 3 thus far, and that appears to be the next one lined up. So if you have any great debates that you would like to see waged, just hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail, or leave a comment in the comment section to one of the videos, not here on the chat because I'll miss it, but to the comments section on the videos. All right. I believe we've hit the end of the line, unless there's anything else we need to hit on. I don't see any other topics brought up in the chat, other than here's one in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so it's I think there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of Oklahoma fans that are football. They live and die football all year long. But I think there's started to become a lot more, obviously, attention to this Oklahoma softball program over the years. And so Oklahoma's heading into regionals this weekend. The postseason is officially here. Oklahoma won the Big 12 championship, sweeping through the regular season undefeated. 18-0, won the Big 12 tournament title last weekend in Oklahoma City at Hall of Fame Stadium, beating Texas in the finale 6-1. So there's a lot of really, really great things. Oklahoma has the chance, Mark, and I do believe in jinx, so I'll probably try not to do this too much, right? But Oklahoma's 51-1 right now, 43-game winning streak. If they, and so how this goes, Oklahoma will play in regionals. So if they'll play, they'll play 3 games. They have to win 3 games to win the regionals. Then they go to super regionals. If they sweep through the regionals and the super regionals ahead of the Women's College World Series, they will have broken the record for the most consecutive wins ever in the season. Arizona holds the record for 47 consecutive wins, I think in the late 90s. And so Oklahoma has the opportunity to get there with 43 right now, headed into the College World Series. So playing really, has been really, really consistent over the year. Like I said, 51-1, whatever sport you play. Having that type of win percentage is just incredible. And so they continue to, it's very, very intriguing. They continue to find ways to challenge themselves. They continue to find ways to motivate themselves. And we'll see how this postseason goes. They have the opportunity to three-peat, which, again, UCLA is the only team, I believe. Maybe Arizona did this as well, but it's only happened once in college softball history. So, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But it's the biggest and most exciting time of the year with regionals and super regionals, and of course the Women's College World Series that gets kickstarted in the first week in June.
My daughter played softball through high school. It's a fun sport. It's faster paced than baseball. It's a fun sport, and it's again, you can sit down for 90 minutes to 2 hours and watch a game, and it's exciting, and it's gained a lot of momentum. I first covered it in the late 90s when the SEC was just starting. I don't know the exact years of when these conferences started, but it was right at the birth of softball and these major conferences taking it on as an official sport. And it's just obviously blossomed and exploded and become a pretty major force on television. And I'm guessing, I'll show you my level of softball knowledge from a national perspective, other than watching my daughter play at the high school level, in terms of knowing what's going on, is I'm guessing that that Arizona team that won all those consecutive games would be the Jenny Finch. I was just starting to look it up, but I didn't verify that. But I would guess that that's the one softball player I know. So,
yep. And Mark, unlike other sports as well, this softball has changed a ton over the last 20 years or so, in terms of it's more of a hitter's game than it used to be previously. Now pitchers still dominate the game a little bit, but there's a lot more hitting as well. But the game was traditionally owned really by the Pac-12. So the UCLA's, the Arizonas, the um, Arizona State's, Washington, like those teams are very consistent blue bloods, so to speak, in the softball area. But now the Big 12 and the SEC and the kind of more of the middle part of the country has started to gain momentum. So Pac-12 is still there. UCLA is still probably known as the biggest, I think, name consistently through the years. I think they've won the most national championships of any team. Oklahoma's obviously gaining for their success, but Patty Gasso and the team has really kind of cemented themselves as a legacy here over the last 10 years, and the amount of national championships that they've won. I believe Oklahoma's won 5 national championships in the last 10 years. So anyways, they continue to be a solid program, and it's obviously different from the softball perspective, but they've talked a lot about 10 years ago at the Women's College World Series, like they were excited and that there was 2,000 people there, and now that stadium holds about 10,000, and it's always full, even if Oklahoma or even Oklahoma State, locally isn't playing. So I think the growth in the sport is really interesting to see and watch, and exciting, because there's a little bit more of, I think, for the love of the game impact for these kids than you see maybe at the college football or the college basketball level, right? Just because, yeah, they have professional softball, but it's not anything where you can make a living at. So there's a lot more, I think there's a lot more pride, there's a lot more love, passion that's shown sometimes by these kids as well, that you don't see, because they know that it's never really the same after you graduate. Like I said, there's a lot of movement to, and there's about 4 or 5 different professional leagues that are going on now. But it's nothing like the NFL, or if it's nothing like the NBA or anything like that. So you see a lot more pride in your school, passion that shows in the college game.
Very cool. Very cool. So Oklahoma trying to make history again on the diamond. We appreciate Jason being here. Thank you so much for doing this each and every week, Jason. Make it on back, everyone, for Sooners Live. Keep it locked in here at the Voice of College Football. We will let you know our plans in regards to scheduling coming up. And we will continue to talk Oklahoma football with all of you. And you guys have a great week, and we will see you soon.